Hey everyone, this is Alex. This is the recording for the Lesson 0 event for the fountain pen, in case you missed it. So what we're actually making today is a fountain pen, right? So this one based on Schaefer's Sagaris line. So what we're going to do is, just like before, we're going to hide this canvas and show the skeletonized sketch. And actually, if you were around last week, this is a little more bare bones than before. And that's because we're going to use some tools such as extrude to actually build the center of this body here. But also, just like before, we're going to use revolve to generate a lot of these sort of more cylindrical shapes. The trickiest part is probably going to be the actual fountain pen tip right here, which we'll get into. But that sort of has that classic spade design. And yeah, so what we're going to do first is, again, we're going to show all of our sketches. And the way that I did that was I just clicked on the little light bulb over here. And what we're going to focus on first is the pen body. So what I want you to do is to go to sketches. We're not going to worry about the fountain tip, cap, or anything else here. We're just going to focus on the part where you actually grip onto the pen. And so the way that we're going to form this is, because it's a cylindrical shape, we're going to form it using something called the revolve tool, which again, the revolve tool is, imagine you take the shape that you see here and you spin it around, kind of like on a potter's wheel, or if you know what a lathe is, the same idea. So you spin that around and it takes this profile and turns it about an axis. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Create, which again, the Create tab is all about turning 2D sketches into 3D shapes. So we're going to go to Revolve. The first thing it wants is a profile. So we're going to go ahead and click on this. You can see as I move my mouse over, it highlights, and that's because this is considered a profile. A profile can be any closed region. So that can either be a sketch or a face or anything like that. We'll actually see the face bit a little bit later. But for right now, we're just going to worry about this sketch. So if you click on this, the next thing it wants is an axis. So to select that, we click on where it says select here. You can see that's highlighted, so now it's ready for input. So the axis that we want is where it's going to revolve around. So in this case, we don't want this edge, we want it to revolve around the center of the pen, which is this line. So we click on this. You can see that it took that profile shape and it swept it all the way around. And again, revolve by default goes to 360 degrees, but you completely have the ability to go less than that if you'd like, right? So if you wanted to create half a pen or 3/4 of a pen for some reason, you can do that, but again, we're going to leave it at 360 degrees. The other way you can do this, by the way, is you can change the type from angle to full, and then it sweeps all the way around no matter what. So, and for this operation, we're not joining to anything or anything like that, so we're just leave it on new body, because this is going to be the first body in our 3D design. So you hit OK. Give it a second. And what you can see is nothing much has happened here, but on the left-hand side, a new category called bodies has shown up, right? And if we drop this down, we can see that we have one body here. In this case, it's body 12 because I've already worked on this 3D design, so this is the 12th body that I've created so far, but the first one that you've created. Normally it starts from 1 and goes up from there. So what we want to do is to help, actually categorize everything and to keep track. We're going to change the name. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to click on body, so that it highlights. And you can see that as I click on body over here, it highlights the corresponding body in the design area. So if I click on it again though, now you can see it's actually allowed me to change the name. So in this case, I'm going to call it pen body. There you go. Pretty simple. So to make the pen body, what we're going to do is, or at least to make the rest of the pen body, we're going to use a tool that we haven't talked about yet called extrude. And the way to think about extrude is that you take a 2D shape, right, and that could either be, again, a face or profile, and imagine that you're pushing Play-Doh through that shape, right? So you're extruding it. And so as a result, if you want to make a box, you draw a square or a rectangle, and you extrude it upwards. So that way you give it some height. And so what we're going to do to make the rest of this pen body, we're going to take this circle and turn it into a cylinder by extruding. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Create, Extrude, and then just for this part, we're going to show the canvas again so we can get an idea about how far this needs to go. So for the profile, you can see that's the only thing that we need here, unlike Revolve, which needs a profile and an axis. We're going to choose this profile here, right? And you can see as I hover over this face, it's allowing me to select that. That's how I know it's a valid profile. So if I click on that, you can see that it immediately highlights and it gives me this little arrow. And so I have two options here. So I can either type in a distance, or I can simply drag the arrow. And that allows me to extrude it outward. So we'll let's look at it from the top. Right, so we can extrude it pretty far, right? So we can go to, let's say, here, for instance, and that seems pretty good, right? So 65 millimeters in this case. And then what we want to do is we want to make sure that this cylinder is attached to the rest of the pen body. So we're going to go ahead and leave it on join, right? So that becomes all one thing, and just hit OK. And now you can see that we still have exactly one body, the pen body, even though we have two different operations here. Right? So what we're going to do is we want to make sure that this end here is sort of, it's a little more ornamental. So let's actually give this a chamfer. Right? So everything that we've done so far has been under the Create tab. What we want to do now is we want to actually use the Modify tab to change an existing body by making a small tweak to it. So what we want to do is click on Modify, then go to chamfer. Right? Now, the only thing that it's looking for here is edges. Right? So rather than before, where we're looking for profile, which is like in any closed region, all we're looking for here is some edge. In this case, we want to focus on this edge right here. So we click on that. You can see, just like before, as soon as we've selected a valid input, it gives us either the option to type in a number, or it gives us this little arrow that we can drag so we can make a more, kind of objective, or I guess subjective appearance decision. So if you click on this and drag this inward, you can see that it gives a little chamfer. And we just want to do a little bit, nothing crazy. So let's look at it from the side. I think that looks pretty good. So you hit OK. And there you go. Yeah, so it looks pretty good. OK, so go ahead and hide the canvas again. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to focus on the actual fountain pen tip. Right, so this guy right here. What we normally would associate with a fountain pen, right? Everything here so far is, kind of like a normal pen. The fountain tip is what really gives it this kind of characteristic look. So what we want to do is we want to show the fountain tip profile, the fountain tip shape, and the fountain tip rail, right? So we need these three pieces of information to get the full shape that we're looking for. So everything so far, in case you don't know, this is everything that we've been dealing with so far has been called solids, right? So this pen body is called a solid because it's a three-dimensional shape, right? It's not like paper where it doesn't have very much thickness at all. If you were to put this in a glass of water or something like that, this would actually displace some volume, right? It's watertight. So what we're going to do for the actual fountain pen tip is we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to deal with something called surfaces. And a surface is, again, more like a sheet of paper, right? So it has, so length and width, but it doesn't really have any thickness. And so the reason why we're doing that is because fountain tip pen is kind of more like a sheet metal, right? You have this sort of, shape that's bent, and then it's sort of cut out. And so we're going to simulate that by doing something first called a sweep. So the sweep exists in the solid modeling area as well, but for this one, we're actually going to go to a completely different environment. So we go to Model and Patch. Now you can see we're in a completely different environment. It has a lot of the same names for things, but what you actually make with these aren't solids. They're not three-dimensional objects. They're two-dimensional objects that have some kind of 3D space to them. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Create, Sweep, and so kind of interestingly, we see Profile, which we've seen before, and Path, which is something that we haven't seen before. So profile, in this case, is not going to be an enclosed region. It's actually going to be just any line, essentially. So that can be an edge, that can be a sketch. In this case, the profile that we want is the profile of the actual fountain pen tip, which is this sketch right here. Do you see the sort of curve? This guy? This is the one that we want. So we actually want to click on this. And you can see that's highlighted, so it's accepted it as an input. Now, for the path, again, this is something we haven't talked about before. But essentially the way that sweep works is it's going to take this shape and it's going to sweep it along this path. So it's kind of like extrude, except extrude only works in one direction. Sweep will actually work in whatever direction the path is going. And the reason why that's important, you'll see in just a second. So if you go to Path click on that. And then for this path, we want to choose, again, this line. Right? Now for this one, actually uncheck change selection, just because there's like a little bit of a thing here that we don't want as part of our path. So make sure that that's deselected and click on this line. And now you can see why that's important, right? So unlike extrude, which would just go out straight, this actually curves along this path, which if you look at a fountain pen from the side, you can see that it has this kind of little curve to it, just like we're doing. So for now, we're just gonna let it go all the way along the path. We want a new body here, so then we just hit OK. All right. So now you can see you have this like really strange looking fountain pen thing hanging off the end. And you can see on the left here that we've actually created a new body, body 13. But the weird thing is that the symbol is very different, right? So you see up here for pen body, it's just a solid cylinder. And for body 13, you see it has this kind of broken cylinder wrap thing, right? So that lets you know that this is a solid and this is a surface. They're both bodies, but one actually has volume, the other doesn't. So what we need to do next is we need to cut out the shape of the fountain pen tip. And that's what this next step is going to be important. So what we need to do is, again, we need to punch out this shape from this surface. And so the way that we're going to do that is we're going to use another tool under Modify called Split Body. So the way that this works is we're going to choose a body, right? In this case, it's going to be this one, body 13, which is a surface that we just made. And then for the splitting tool, we're going to use the shape of the fountain pen tip to sort of like punch it out. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go to here. We're going to click on Body to Split, right? Make sure this is selected. And again, this surface is the body that we want to split. So we're going to click on this. Now for the splitting tool, we want to choose that fountain pen shape. So we're going to hover over here. And you can see as I hover over the actual sketch, it highlights. And that lets me know that I can choose that as an input. So I'm going to click on that. And you can see that what's happened here is that shape has been pushed all the way up and all the way down, because that's the actual cutting action that it's showing you. So if you hit OK, so what's happened now, look on the left. So you can see that there's actually now two surfaces here, two surface bodies. One of them is the actual fountain pen tip, and the other is just kind of all the leftover stuff, right? So that's stuff we don't actually need. So we have two options. We can either hide it by clicking on this, or we can actually clean it up by right-clicking and choosing Remove. And what that does is it removes it from the list in the browser here, and it actually puts a marker in the timeline to let you know that, hey, you actually removed something at this point in your history. So that can be useful because you want to go back, right? So the timeline keeps track of everything that's happened in a 3D model. So if I rewind this by pulling this back, see all of a sudden now that cut out piece is back, right? So excellent. So we have our fountain pen tip shape, right? But it doesn't have any volume, right? It's just kind of like a sheet of paper. So we actually want to give it some thickness. What we can do is we can go to Modify or Create and then Thicken. Now, what we want to do is we want to select the faces that we actually want to thicken, right? So that's what it's asking for here. So in this case, we want to select pretty much all the faces on this body, right? So by clicking on that, you can see now it's asking me for exactly how thick do I want to make it, right? So what I'm going to do is let's try going outward first. That doesn't look quite right. Let's try going inward instead. That's better, right? So let's try -0.1. That looks pretty good, right? Not too thick, but thick enough that you can believe it actually hold its shape, right? So -0.1 millimeters. So the way that it thinks about this is, in this case, inward is negative, outward is positive. So that's why we need to type in a negative number. So -0.1 millimeters, and we're going to leave it new body, hit OK. Now when you thicken, it creates a new body, but it leaves the old surface. So just like before, let's actually right-click and remove. And now you can see that we have the pen body, and we have the fountain pen tip, which is what we're going to call this. So just like before, click on this guy, click it again, and you can start typing in a name. Excellent. Great. So we have that. So the next thing we want to do is there's like this little ink dispensing tube thing down here that you always see in fountain pens. That's what we're going to make next. So go ahead and show the ink channel sketch and then the ink channel profile. Now this one's a little bit different. Instead of using extrusions to actually add things, we're going to use it to subtract things. So what I need you to do is go back to Patch and then Model Environment. Then we're going to go to Create Extrude. And this time we're going to choose this circle right here. Right, so if I click on that, you can see that it's accepted that as the input. We're just going to go ahead and drag this out to right about here. Right, so just so it crosses this profile. And then we leave it on join. We hit OK. Now, for this one, we're actually going to use this shape, this profile, to cut away material instead of add material. Now, in order to prevent this from cutting away from our fountain pen tip, we need to hide it. So we're going to go ahead and click on that. So that way it's removed. Right? Next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to Create Extrude. And this time we're going to choose this profile instead. Now, again, everything that we've done so far has been joining, right? But the way that Fusion works is that every 3D tool is a double-edged sword, right? So you can either add or you can subtract. So what we're going to do here is, again, we've selected this profile. So let's go ahead and drag this out. And you can see that rather than creating new stuff, it's turned red, and you can see that it's subtracting material instead. But it's only subtracting from one side, so we want to subtract both ways. We're going to do symmetric instead. Now you can see that it's cutting both ways. So all you do is you hit OK. It's done its job. And when we show the fountain pen tip again by clicking on this light bulb, you can see that all the material on the end is still there. All right. So it's looking pretty good. But let's actually make the cap for this thing as well. So go ahead and click on Cap, and then Clip. All right, so to make this, let's go ahead and hide the pen body and the fountain pen tip. Just like before, we're actually going to revolve this thing. So what you want you to do is go to Create, Revolve. For this one, we're going to choose this guy right here as our profile. And we're going to choose, again, the center of the pen as the axis. So you can see, just like before, we're revolved. We're going to leave it on full, because that's what we care about. And of course, we want this to be a new body, because this is a separate part from the main pen body. Right? So we hit OK. Awesome. Yeah, so it looks pretty good. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go to Body. Click on that again. We're going to call this the cap. Awesome. All right. And we want to make sure this little clip is here. So we're going to go again to Create Extrude. Right? And then we're going to choose this as our profile. All right, so what we're going to do is, this time we want, since this sketch is at the center, we want to extrude both ways. So we're going to go Direction, Symmetric. We're going to leave it on New Body for now. Well, actually, as soon as we move this out, it's going to want to cut. But we're going to fight it. We're going to change the operation to New Body. And then we hit OK. OK. And we're going to call that the clip. Awesome. Okay, great. The only problem with this whole cap right now is the fact that you can't actually fit a pen in there, right? It's just a solid thing. There's actually a cool way that you can make it perfectly fit the actual pen body, which I'm going to show you right now. So what I want you to do is to go to pen body, show it, and then what we're going to do is we're going to use a tool called Combine. It's under the Modify menu. So if you go to Modify, Combine. What you need to do is you need to click on the cap as the target body. And then, so the weird thing here is that it's asking for something called a tool body. And so the way to think about how this works is that with Combine, you can join two objects together. That's one option. But you can also use it to use one object to remove material from another object. So it kind of acts like a tool, right? It's like a drill bit or something like that. So what you want to do is you want to click for tool bodies, the pen body here, right? Because the pen body is going to remove material from the cap. In order to do that, we actually change the operation from join to cut. And then the other thing is that we don't want to remove the actual tool after the fact, so we want to click on Keep Tools. So you hit OK, and it looks like absolutely nothing happened. But if we hide the pen body, you can see that the pen body has actually dug out a hole for itself inside of the cap. Right? We can even see the chamfer of the pen end in there. Right? So now that is literally a perfect fit. Right? And we did that using Modify Combine. So if we ever needed to 3D print these or anything like that, those would actually fit extremely snugly to the point where you actually might need to create a little bit of clearance so it actually doesn't get stuck when you put it on. But what we're going to do now is, I think we've actually made everything. Right, so we click on this, click on this. The only thing that we could do is we can make the actual pen tip look a little fancier. Right, so what we can do is we're going to go to the embossing sketch here. And you can see I've actually traced out the Fusion logo a little bit. Right, so what we're going to do is we're going to emboss the Fusion logo on the surface of the fountain pen tip. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go to Modify. Instead of Split Body, we're going to do something called Split Face instead. So in this case, it asks for what faces do you want to split, which is going to be just the top here. Right? And then for the splitting tool, we're going to choose the Fusion sketch. Right? And so you can see just like before, it extended in both directions. But if we hit OK, we can see that under the bodies list, it actually hasn't created any new bodies. And that's because all it's done is actually just segmented the surface here. So it's a little confusing, I guess, but the way to think about it is that anytime you see a segmentation on a body, that's generally a new face, right? So, a box would have 6 faces. Something like a sphere would have just 1. But in this case, we had 3 to start off with. And then we use that sketch to sort of mark off a certain section of that body as a new face. So this little F on here, that's a completely new face on the fountain pen tip. And we're going to use that to our advantage. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go to Modify, Press Pull. Now Press Pull is kind of a unique tool because it's context aware. So whatever we decide to click on, it's going to change itself to adapt to that situation. So in this case, I want to click on that F face. So I click on that. You can see now it's changed to something called Offset Faces. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to leave it on Offset Type Automatic. And then we're going to tell it to go down -0.05. And so what's done is taken that section of the face and has actually sunken it down a little bit. So that's one of the advantages of being able to split the faces, that you can control the faces differently from the rest of the body. So in this case, Offset Faces does exactly what it said it would, so we hit OK. And now we've embossed the Fusion logo in the tip. So now let's actually make this look pretty. So we're going to go from the model environment to the render environment. And you can see right now that everything is made out of stainless steel. Right? So a couple things have changed here, right? We've gone from this sort of what's called orthographic view, where it doesn't matter how far away you are from the camera, everything still looks the same size. Now we're in perspective mode, which is how you see the real world, right? The farther away something is from the camera, the smaller it gets, right? So what we're going to do here is we're going to go to Setup Appearance. And appearance is kind of cool because Fusion has a whole bunch of different appearances that you can choose to apply to the different parts of your model, right? So everything from metal to rubber to plastics, to even some things like glass, which is really cool because the way that the light sort of diffracts through it, it actually mimics the way that happens in real life. So what we're going to do for right now is we're just going to focus on the set of materials that are already in this drawing. So I've picked some out for you. So we've got stainless steel, linear brushing. We've got polished brass, hard rubber. So what we're going to do first is let's actually change the material of the pen body. So we're going to go ahead and grab that stainless steel. We're going to leave this on body's components. I'm just going to drag that over. And you can see as I drag it over, that whole pen body highlights as an input. do that, right? So there you go, looks pretty good. All right, we're gonna do the same thing with the cap. Okay. And we're gonna leave the fountain pen tip alone, right? Because stainless there looks pretty good. It's the sort of satin, steel satin. But you can see, it's kind of hard to see right now, but if you go to canvases, the original pen design had these kind of brass sections. So in order to do those, we don't want to apply it to the whole body, we want to apply it to just some of the faces. So what we want to do is we want to change our apply to option from bodies and components to faces. So now what we can do is we can click and drag this polished brass over to, for instance, just this ring, right? And now it applies to just that face. Then we can do the same thing for this part. We can apply it to the end of the cap here, right? Like that. If we want to apply it to the end of the pen tip, we actually have to see it, so we need to hide the cap and the clip. Now we can see it. We can go here and here, right? We want to make sure that the pen grip is actually comfortable, so we want to make that change to rubber. So we're going to go to the hard rubber option here. And by the way, if you don't see something here, you can always download new appearances below. So you can go, aluminum and go all the way down. Let's say you wanted a bead blasted aluminum look. You can just click on the download material and it'll load into your Fusion. So, but in this case, I already have the hard rubber here. So you just drag that over, this, and like that. Excellent. Cool. And so show the cap and clip again. Let's change it back to bodies and components so we can give the whole clip that brass look. And one last time, let's actually switch to faces so we can apply the brass color to the Fusion logo. And we want to make this part glossy black plastic. All right. And there's our pen. Awesome. So I'm going to close that. So it looks a little better, right? It's a little more lifelike, but it's not photorealistic. So the way that we do that is we actually have to enable something called ray tracing. So what we're going to do is on the left-hand side, or upper left, we're going to click on Enable in-canvas Render. And you can see that it's getting fuzzy and then sharpens over time. So what Fusion is actually doing is it's sending out beams of light and seeing how it bounces around the model. Right, so the more time you give it, the more refined it's going to get. So you see it's getting a little bit sharper. Now I have a relatively quick computer, so it's not taking me too long. You might find if you're using this on a laptop or something like that, this takes much more time. This all has to do with how fast your CPU is. Right? So let's say that this is taking an extremely long time. Like let's say you have a complicated model or just an old computer. One of the cool things about Fusion is the fact that it's cloud-based. And Autodesk has a whole bunch of servers at its disposal that it can use to render this image for you. So what you can do is, let's say you don't want to render this yourself, what you do is you go to Render here, and you leave it on Cloud Renderer. And you can choose a whole bunch of different options here, like if you want to, if you know it's going to be shown on a tablet screen or something like that, you can crank up the megapixels here. This is a really high resolution image. You can change the render quality depending on how fast you want it versus how good you want it to look. And if you have a nice computer, you can actually do local renderer where it will essentially do the same process but in the background. But again, if you have a weak computer, chances are you want Cloud Renderer to work instead. So all you do is click Render. It'll start to show up in the rendering gallery down here. And yeah, just all you do is give it some time. You can do anything you want in the meantime. So yeah, so it looks pretty good. Again, one thing to keep in mind is that anytime you move the view or you go to a different page or go back to the modeling environment, it's going to restart that rendering process. So you have to be a little bit careful. One last thing is if you want to actually save the image that you're looking at, right? Then all you do is click on Capture Image, and then click OK, and then it'll ask you a place to save, and then all of a sudden now you have a normal picture of that render. So if you want to share it with somebody or you want to work on it in Photoshop or something like that to make it look fancier, you can totally do that. So you just hit OK, and then it'll ask. Right. One of the things I want to show you is you can actually simulate the focus of a camera if you want to. So the way that you do that is you go to Scene Settings and scroll down. Whoop, and click on Depth of Field here. Now what this does is allows you to focus the virtual camera on a specific point. Right. So if I want to focus on the pen tip here, I can click on that. And now you can see that the pen tip's in focus and everything in the background is much blurrier, right? Then I can control that blur. I can go to, change this to something like 0.2 or something like that, so it's a little less extreme. But yeah. And then you have more advanced settings like you can control the exposure or, the focal length, that kind of stuff. One of the cool things you could do is you can actually have different environments that you could place this in. So if I go to Environment Library, let's say I wanted to have this pen just so happen to be sitting in the middle of a dry lake bed. I can download that environment just like I can with a material. Give it a little bit. Disposal. You can even add some of your own if you want to. All you need is an HDR image. But yeah, so if we want to see this in the middle of a dry lake bed, we just click and drag this over. And then what we need to do is we need to go to Settings, change the background from a solid color to an environment, and all of a sudden, now your pen is sitting in the middle of a dry lake bed, just like that. So yeah. All right, so hope you've enjoyed this little recording. Again, if you want to have the sketches that we used in this video, just send an email over to zegobeast, spelled ZEGOBEAST, at gmail.com, and we'll send you a copy of the sketches used in this video. If you have any questions, send us an email there as well. Again, thanks to everyone who actually attended the New York Fusion 360 Lesson 0 event, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.